We had previously looked at the textual sources for the assertion that mitzvat Kriyat Shema involves belief. It involves the Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shemaim, the acceptance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the prime force in creation, and based upon the Sefer HaChinuch, is an obligation that is constant and applies equally across the board, geographically, whether one is in Eretz Yisrael or in Chutz La'aretz. It is a responsibility that transcends time, in that it applies to both a pre- and a post-Churban period, and also is equally applicable to both male and female, although the actual expression of that belief in the form of the recitation of the Kriyat Shema is deemed to be a mitzvah aseh shehazman grama. Women are not required to recite the Shema twice each day. That, however, does not detract from the belief system, the Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shemayim, embedded in the words of the Shema. Mitzvat Talmud Torah, on the other hand, by its very nature, reflect differences and change, because Mitzvat Talmud Torah involves understanding, and understanding is directly related to the individual skills of the person studying the texts. Changes in terms of the time of day in which one studies, whether in the morning or late at night, will impact upon the quality of the learning. The material that is studied, whether abstract and analytical in the form of Gemara study or emotional material embedded in the Midrashim, does relate and resonate in some segments of the population more so than in others, and there are even those who maintain that the study of Torah in Eretz Yisrael is on a higher level than the Torah studied in Chutz La'aretz, although this concept remains more of a belief rather than one that is evidence-based. We shall be looking at three sources that demonstrate the difference change aspect of Mitzvat Talmud Torah. One, a halachic source, the other two drawn from midrashic material, the Agadah. The first source, halachic in nature, that while the mitzvah of Talmud Torah rests upon the male, there's no reason to preclude women from limud Torah in this day and age. However, there is a halachic difference between the Torah Shebiktav material that is studied and the Torah Sheba'al Peh. This is reflected in the fact that one can recite a bracha, Asher Bacha Bani Mikol Ha'amim V'natan Lanu Et Torah, a bracha recited over the reading of the Torah text, even in situations where the individual who is reading the text or for whom the text is being read has no inkling regarding the content of that text. In other words, the mere recitation of the Chumash text without understanding is deemed to be a mitzvah in its own right. This in contrast to material that comes under the umbrella of Torah Sheba'al Peh. That material requires understanding, comprehension relative to the skills of the individual, and for which without understanding, in other words, the mere recitation of the words of Torah Sheba'al Peh, a bracha is not recited, and in theory would become a bracha levatala under these circumstances. A second source demonstrating the variable component embedded in Mitzvat Talmud Torah relates to the time of day. And here we draw upon an observation recorded in Masechet Eruvin, where in typical Talmudic fashion, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish ponders the reason for the creation of the moon, commenting that Lo Ibra Sihara Ela Legirsa. The moon was created only for Torah study by its light. This, of course, was not a scientific observation. There are many other reasons that God might have had for the creation of the moon, but from a theological perspective, this is how he viewed the ultimate purpose for the creation of the moon. Keeping in mind that he lived in a pre-modern era without electricity, or for that matter light generated from combustion of fuel, and hence his observation that to him God's creation of the moon was to provide him with an opportunity for Torah study at night. This is followed by an observation from Rabbi Zera, somewhat of a feel-good statement, that Mechadadim Shmaticha, your teaching, your observation, are exceptionally sharp. Not necessarily a comment regarding the purpose for the creation of the moon, but generally the insights of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish stood apart from the insights of most of the students of the Bet Midrash. To which Amar Lahu, he responded to Rabbi Zera, De Yamama Ninhu. Those teachings, those insights were formulated during the daytime hours, either literally daytime and specifically the morning hours, and for which I might add that outside the modern Orthodox world, where the curriculum of Torah and secular studies is spread equally throughout the day based upon the availability of teaching staff, etc., and for which, from my own experience, the intensity of Torah study is somewhat diluted when compared to the level of Torah study in the non-modern Orthodox schools, where there's a prioritization for the core subjects of Limud Torah to be held in the first 2 or 3 periods of the day. There, of course, is a downside to this model for those students who, for whatever the reason, do not have the skill set to be engaged in that level of serious Torah study. One can also read into the observation of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish that the most productive years of one's learning takes place earlier rather than later, although this is not necessarily a rule set in concrete. Anecdotal evidence to this would be the fact that most of the recipients of the Nobel Prizes comes for work that was undertaken during the first 20 or so years post-high school. Another source for the differences between day and night with respect to Limud Torah is somewhat off the planet. Comes from the Yalkut Shimoni. Yalkut Shimoni was a compilation of Aggadic material for which the author brought together older material that were accessible to him, various interpretations and explanations of the Torah text, and arranged these explanations according to a sequence of the Parshat HaShavua. There is a Yalkut Shimoni commentary to Shmot 34:28. In Shmot 24:38 we are told that Moshe remained upon Har Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. This referring to the third set of 40 days and 40 nights, the period of reconciliation beginning on Rosh Chodesh Elul. The text testifies that Lechem lo achal, umayim lo shata. During the 40 days, Moshe Rabbeinu, a human being, did not eat nor drink, a physical impossibility without dying. And it was during these 40 days that Vayichtov al haluchot, he, referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, engraved upon the luchot a divrei habrit, the words, the content of the covenant, aseret hadvarim, the aseret hadibrot. Clearly, to testify that Moshe Rabbeinu neither ate nor drank would imply a metaphysical set of circumstances. And this is the point that the Yalkut Shimoni notes with respect to this pasuk, that if Moshe, while on Har Sinai, entered the non-physical world of the Malachim, beyond time and space, evidenced by the fact that he was nourished from the spiritual forces of the higher worlds, if so, minayin haya Moshe yodea, how was Moshe able to distinguish Eimatay Yom ve'eimatay Laila, when it was day or when it was night? Day and night, a physical manifestation of the sun and the moon. If we are to accept that Moshe Rabbeinu entered a metaphysical world, no sun, no moon, then we are required to deal with the question of 40 days and 40 nights. There are many ways one can respond to this question. It's not a rock-solid question, but Yalkut Shimoni uses this information to propose a Medrash Aggadic solution. Ella, he goes on to write, Bishat shehaya HaKadosh Baruch Hu melamdom mikra, when God studied with Moshe the mikra, referring to the Torah Shebiktav, haya yodeya shehu yom. Moshe knew that it was daylight hours down below on earth. Bishat shehaya melamdom mishnah, however, when God studied the Torah Sheba'al Peh, beginning with Mishnah, haya yodeya shehu laila, then he knew that it was night. This, as an aside, responds to the obvious question that if God chiseled out the Aseret HaDibrot, a mere 613 letters, which even a human being would not require more than a 24-hour period to accomplish this task, then why was Moshe required to remain on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights? Not eating, not drinking. The implied answer here is that Moshe Rabbeinu during these 40 days received not just the 10 Commandments, but the entire Torah Shebiktav, and also the entire Torah Sheba'al Peh. This, of course, is a belief statement, one that cannot be proven nor disproven, but is nevertheless accepted in most segments of Orthodox Judaism of today. The upshot of this Yalkut Shimoni is that there is a difference between Torah Shebiktav, daytime, illumination, light, however one interprets this Medrash Agada, which is contrasted to the Torah Sheba'al Peh, material that is studied insofar as Moshe Rabbeinu is concerned during the nighttime hours. And hence we return to the core difficulty with respect to the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema and mitzvah Talmud Torah, whereby the Rebbe asks, why is it that the mitzvah of Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shemayim, belief in a single entity to the exclusion of dualism and multiple God reflected in the obligation to recite the Kriyat Shema, yet the Kriyat Shema is treated as two independent mitzvot, one to be fulfilled by day, uvukumecha, the other to be fulfilled by night, b'shachbacha, whereas the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, which as we have demonstrated involves change, differences, both from the standpoint of time, from the standpoint of the material that is studied, comes across as a single mitzvah, spread throughout the 24 hours of a day and to be fulfilled to the best of one's abilities. And with this, I shall bring to a conclusion my rendition of a Sicha for Parshat Va'et Hanan, drawn from the Likutei Sichot, volume 14.